Welcome to Forthright and a column from the last week's Spokesman Review and some of the feedback that came as a result of that column on a pretty hot topic. The column title was Respect for the Defense of Marriage, and it was published December 15th, 2022 in the Spokesman Review. In 1996, Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act. Senators Joe Biden and Patty Murray were two of the 85 senators voting yay. Last month, the Senate passed the Respect for Marriage Act with 61 votes in favor, repealing DOMA to eliminate gender as a criterion and acknowledging that the debate belongs at the state level. So let's have that debate. What is marriage? Christians are a diverse group, and the concept of civil unions has become more acceptable in Western countries. But for many Christians worldwide, the word marriage still refers to the tradition of holy matrimony instituted by God, uniting male and female in a complementary and co-equal relationship. Marriages establish families, the smallest economic unit in the community and the original source of Social Security for elders and those unable to care for themselves. Marriage has also historically recognized the biological reality of conceiving and rearing children. DOMA grew out of the Judeo-Christian tradition and defined marriage for purposes of federal statutes as a, quote, legal union between one man and one woman as husband and wife, end quote. It was and is the definition rooted in centuries of social norms found in diverse cultures on every continent. The newly signed Respect for Marriage Act repeals DOMA and federally recognizes any marriage between two individuals as long as it is, quote, valid in the state where the marriage was entered into, end quote. It explicitly bans federal recognition of marriages between more than two individuals. It's a very dry, corporatized definition. The amended bill as signed by President Biden disappointed those supporting a non-traditional definition of marriage by not forcing all states to adopt a non-gendered definition of marriage. And while the act recognizes the, quote, decent and honorable religious or philosophical premises, end quote, for diverse beliefs about the role of gender in marriage, the Respect for Marriage Act does not protect individuals with sincerely held beliefs from persecution by lawsuit. Only religious institutions and organizations are protected. After passage of the act, Cardinal Timothy M. Dolan of New York, chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for Religious Liberty, issued a statement in support of, long quote here, Americans, both religious and secular, who share this time-honored understanding of the truth and beauty of marriage. The act will be used as evidence that religious believers must surrender to the state's interest in recognizing same-sex civil marriages, putting individuals at greater risk of discrimination under this legislation, end quote. Civil marriage is a relatively new development, with ugly roots in the late 1800s as a means to enforce color line barriers. Including interracial marriage in the Respect for Marriage Act is more political ammunition than necessary protection. Society has abandoned the debunked 18th century science used to justify anti-miscegenation laws, but including the phrase in the act will undoubtedly be used to justify progressive hit pieces in the next election, labeling anyone who opposes the Respect for Marriage Act as racist, regardless of the reasons for their objection. Marriage licenses weren't ubiquitous across all the states until the 1920s, during the progressive era drive to create uniformity in state laws. Common kinship limits on who can marry have long recognized inbreeding is potentially as bad for humans as it is for livestock. Now that we have divorced civil marriage from its biological roots as a protective institution for procreation, the next questions are obvious. If the imperative to the Respect for Marriage Act was removing barriers so everyone can marry who they love, why only one marriage at a time? Why limit marriage to only two people when polyamory is pushing to go mainstream? Why keep kinship barriers in place? We are left with an America operating under two views of marriage, the ancient sacramental and the ever-changing progressive civil definitions. Sincerely held religious beliefs about traditional marriage extend beyond the walls of churches, synagogues, mosques, or other religious institutions. Believers act on them at home and in the workplace and in the community. In a diverse and multicultural society, it is imperative to respect the sincerely held beliefs of others as you wish to be respected. What are yours? when I ended the column with that question, I'm really thinking, what is it that's your sincerely held belief that you wish to be respected? And we have to have that kind of introspection to know where our lines are. That doesn't mean that my line means I can disrespect yours or force you to do something different, or it just means that we have to recognize that we have two different ways of looking at this, and that's what I see, and that's what I'm trying to express in this column, was that we have two different definitions. That word now is seen differently by people. So, of course, the first email early Thursday morning was, "Your religious bigotry is showing again. This is not Iran and you are not the Taliban. Stop being ridiculous." All right, well, recognizing that the civil definition of marriage has drifted apart from the religious definition is not bigotry. It's just a statement of fact. The only question is whether the civil authority is going to respect the decent and honorable religious or philosophical premises on which individuals in this society may disagree, or whether the state will, Taliban-like, impose its own definition. And I printed off some other comments. I had a couple of really good exchanges on Twitter, and I will say this is with people that did not agree with me, but we had actual respectful exchange of differences of opinion, which is, I celebrate that whenever we can find it. The first one was someone that I communicate with a lot on Twitter. She does not use her name. She's Farmer Grand, but we have some really good debates about politics. Always cordial. We do have some points of agreement occasionally. And she came on to say that love is love. Two consenting adults wish to marry, don't care about the gender. And that's one of the arguments that's made about this. But love and marriage don't actually go together like a horse and carriage. Love has not been a requirement for marriage. It's nice, it's wonderful, it's desirable, but it's not a requirement. No one has ever gone in to get a marriage license from the Justice of the Peace and been asked, do you love this person enough? I mean, there's no love test. There can be many, many motives for marriage, and love can be one of them. So that's fine. You can love. If I give way and acknowledge that there is a civil definition of marriage with which I don't agree, but it exists and I will respect it, that's fine. No licensing office is going to start asking people about a love test. So that's how I answered her. And she said, well, as long as two consenting adults are not denied marriage. And the challenge back to that is, so if it's any two consenting adults, then why the kinship restrictions? Why can't an uncle and a nephew marry so that the uncle can take advantage of how we have defined laws about inheritance so that he can more easily pass a family business on to the nephew? Why do they get denied access to this kind of a special contract? Why does it have to be two people who love each other, who are, that definition starts to fall apart once you separate the civil definition from its traditional roots. You do run into all these questions. So if it's any two consenting adults, well then, why two? Why not three? Why, how do you decide which two can and which two can't? And she took those points, agreed with those points, and then came back to, I find it silly there are folks who are upset with same-sex unions. How does this affect them in any way? And it doesn't, except that it does if I am now asked by the state to recognize a civil marriage as the same thing as I see marriage, with my sincerely held beliefs, and I am not protected from persecution by lawsuit, which is how Americans persecute each other these days. We don't throw rocks, and we're not into stoning, and we aren't burning witches, but we sure do take people to court. And one of the downside in the Respect for Marriage Act, and the reason that many of the Republicans who voted against it is because it does not provide protections for individuals exercising their religious faith. So I had another exchange with Colette Buck, who I've not exchanged with before, but we had a good civil exchange. That was good. Um, and her first comment to me was, we can debate the historical roots of marriage all we want, but that won't change the fact that human societies change over time. Our expectations, rules, and laws should change with us, full stop. That's true, things change over time. However, what I said back to her is, faith doesn't live within the walls of institutions. It's within individuals, and establishing secularism as a state religion violates the establishment clause of the Constitution. That's a column for another time, but that's the problem with the Respect for Marriage Act, is that it does not protect individuals. Again, full stop. We had a little bit of a thing about whether secularism is a religion. That actually would be an interesting thing to look into. What is the definition of a religion, and does secularism meet that definition? I said, but as she came back with, so people have the right to sue another person for discrimination on the basis of sex, gender, and race. Why not sexual orientation? Well, that's because this issue isn't about sexual orientation. This is about an institution of marriage and the fact that I have a different definition for it, and that's not discrimination based on sexual orientation. That's discrimination based on a sincerely held religious belief. If I am the baker that doesn't want to design a cake celebrating a same-sex marriage, first of all, why would somebody want to go to someone for a service like that, for such an intimate act, knowing that this person doesn't support it? Why would you want to employ somebody for a personal service that does not respect or agree with, well, respect is the wrong word, that does not agree with your definition of what you're celebrating, that does not wish to celebrate that with you? You get kind of a half-hearted effort. I really would like somebody doing personal services that's going to put their whole heart into it. And this whole idea of where do you draw a line, I've thought about this a lot as part of a creative profession in architecture, because there could be a lot of things can come up where someone who is working on a restaurant, and the ownership changes, and they decide they're going to change the menu, and so they're going to have their own now they're going to start serving steaks, and before it was a vegetarian restaurant, and if I was a vegan architect, do I still have to do that? Or if that may be a violation of some really sincerely held beliefs on my part. So should I be forced to do something, do a creative act for a behavior or an activity that I sincerely disagree with and don't wish to support? That doesn't mean that I'm saying you cannot do that. It just means I really don't want to be part of that. There are plenty of other people who will. That's where this comes down to. Colette went on to, marrying the person you love falls under the points of everybody being able to seek for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm not saying that you can't get a civil marriage license. In Washington, the state of Washington has agreed that that's okay. Fine, I live here. I will respect that decision that's been made in this state. But marriage licenses issued by the state have nothing to do with love or with sexual activity. I certainly hope they don't. Neither is any business of the state. They are merely a civil contract with specific legal protections. Civil marriage is a legal contract. That's fine. Respect the contract. It's not a marriage as I would see it defined biblically. Those two, we're not going to agree on that. We don't have to agree on that. I just don't want to get sued over not agreeing with that. Because faith is not something that lives inside the walls of a church. Faith is something that lives inside a person, inside an individual in a relationship. And that's not true. That's true not only of Christians. That's true of any person of faith. That it's something that you carry with you, and if it's not part of your everyday moral and ethical framework, then I would say that is perhaps not a faith but a cultural tradition, and there is a difference. And I did have we'll just stop with those two. I did have a couple of other emails. One from someone who's just very concerned about her son, kind of unloaded a whole lot of things. I would just say to Tina, it's really impossible to tell somebody that they're being judgmental without sounding judgmental. So we'll leave it there. I think we found a couple points of agreement, but she said she's never going to read another column. So we'll see. I sometimes get interesting emails from people who peaked and then they write again about 3 months later. And then there was a lot of good feedback from people who had said they appreciate standing up for traditional values. I think there is an argument to be made in a different column at a different time to look at the argument to be made for why the state would be better off backing and encouraging a traditional definition of marriage as the one institution in society that has data demonstrating why that is the greatest source of privilege in this country, is to be raised by your biological parents, preferably married and stable together, so that whatever keeps that kind of relationship stable, reinforcing that as a cultural norm, is better long-term for society. That's the subject of a whole nother column. This column is just pointing out that there's a civil definition of marriage and there is a religious definition of marriage. They may not always agree. They need to respect each other, and the Respect for Marriage Act does not respect individuals who disagree with the civil definition of marriage. That was all. That was the message. That was the lead. We'll have that other debate on another day. Thanks for joining me. I got a notification from Substack today that they're starting to add an opportunity to put a pledge in if you are interested in these podcasts, and that will give me an idea about how much about time and content and what people would like to hear. Give me some feedback, and we'll see what goes on in the new year. Thanks for joining me.